for the rest of his life. I think he's probably going to get
Think he's
hit up.
insane, though?
I don't know. I don't even think it matters. I mean, a lot of it is...
but then it's just another Epstein.
There's
it's another
murder
Ghislaine Maxwell, where
there's
somebody
murder
gets indicted
cases.
and nobody else... Indicted for trafficking kids to...
Right,
no one.
to no one. Right. What is the next crazy thing that's going to explode in the news? Is Bill Clinton's going to have an OnlyFans? Like, what is going to happen? What is the next thing that's going to make us all go, what the is going on?
It's coming. You know,
How many guys were on video saying, ain't no party like a Diddy party? How many people like openly talked about being there?
LeBron?
Yeah, how about Ashton Kutcher? All these people. Like, you guys all...
They always start by giving the public a name. One name, one face, one story big enough to absorb the outrage. Right now, that name is Sean Diddy Combs. And to most people watching the headlines, the story feels simple. A powerful man, accused of disturbing things, finally facing consequences. Case closed. Justice catching up. End of story. But for others, especially those who've watched similar scandals unfold, something about this feels familiar, unfinished. Because when Joe Rogan spoke about Diddy's situation, he didn't sound shocked. He sounded like someone recognizing a pattern he's seen before. A pattern where the public is allowed to see just enough to feel satisfied, but never enough to understand how deep the roots go. Rogan didn't accuse anyone directly. He didn't claim inside knowledge. What unsettled people was that he asked the same question millions of listeners were already thinking. How does something this big only land on one person? Because Diddy didn't operate in isolation. He didn't build his empire alone. He didn't host parties alone. He didn't move through elite spaces alone. And yet, somehow, the spotlight stops exactly at him. That's where the discomfort begins. Online, people started revisiting old clips, old interviews, old quotes that once sounded harmless, even celebratory. Ain't no party like a Diddy party. It was said casually, proudly, repeated by artists, athletes, actors, comedians. For years, it was a badge of access, proof you were inside the circle. Now that phrase sounds different, because according to allegations currently circulating through lawsuits and public reporting, some of those gatherings were not what they appeared to be. They weren't just parties. They were environments where power dynamics were uneven, where consent is now being questioned, and where people claim they were placed in compromising situations without full awareness of what was happening. More than 100 individuals have reportedly come forward with accusations connected to Diddy's alleged activities. Some of the most serious claims involve coercion, manipulation, and the presence of underage individuals. These are allegations, but the scale alone makes people pause. And then comes the question that refuses to go away. If this was happening for years, who else was there? Names that once symbolized success and respectability now float through comment sections and podcasts, not as accusations, but as reminders of proximity. LeBron James, Ashton Kutcher, Usher, Kevin Hart, Leonardo DiCaprio. Again, no claims of wrongdoing are being made here, only one uncomfortable reality. Many of these figures openly acknowledged being part of those spaces. So when Rogan asked, "You all went and you saw nothing," it wasn't an accusation, it was disbelief. Because silence at that scale starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a rule. And this is where the conversation takes a turn most people don't expect. Because the theory forming online isn't that Diddy is innocent, it's that Diddy might not be the top. In fact, some believe he may have served a very specific role, a facilitator, someone powerful enough to host, someone wealthy enough to provide luxury, privacy, and discretion, but not powerful enough to expose the people who attended. That idea immediately brings up another name people would rather not say out loud. Jeffrey Epstein. Different industry, different presentation, same structure. Epstein wasn't famous. He wasn't a celebrity. He was a connector. Someone who created exclusive environments where politicians, financiers, scientists, royalty, and celebrities all crossed paths. And when Epstein fell, the world expected a cascade. What it got instead was silence. Epstein died. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, and the list of alleged beneficiaries never fully materialized. To this day, people still ask, how do you traffic people without clients? That same question is now being asked again. Rogan pointed out something that still bothers many observers. Individuals get charged with trafficking, but official records rarely clarify who the trafficking was for. It's a gap that feels intentional. And when federal agents reportedly raided Diddy's properties and seized massive amounts of digital material, the speculation intensified. Because if recordings exist, and many claim they do,
and that did not feel comfortable at all. So Candace says the reason mainstream news is not picking up this lawsuit, is not paying attention to Diddy at all, is because of this man right here, Lucian Grandage. He is one of the most powerful men in Hollywood and music. And he been up in Diddy's room. So this man right here is Sir Lucian Charles Grandage. He's been the CEO of Universal Music Group since 2010, so you know he done seen some shit. So I had to go to the damn documents. I had to see if this man was actually named, and he is. As you can see, it says Lucian Charles Grandage, and it also says Universal Music Group. On top of that, it says Ethiopia. I cannot fuck up her last name. I refuse to. But she was also a big person in Universal Music Group. And then Christina Coramham, Lord forgive. But she was...
Then the value of those recordings wouldn't just be scandal. It would be leverage, insurance, not something you use loudly, something you keep quietly, which raises a terrifying possibility. What if Diddy wasn't collecting recordings for himself? What if he was holding them for a system that thrives on discretion? That's when people start talking about layers. At the lowest layer, performers, artists, celebrities, faces the public recognizes. Above them, executives, financiers, lawyers, people whose names rarely trend, but whose decisions shape entire industries. And above them, a space so rarely exposed that most people don't even have language for it. This is where critics say the conversation always dies. Because once you start talking about systems instead of individuals, the story becomes harder to package and harder to control. That may explain why some media outlets focus heavily on the shock elements, the footage, the headlines, the spectacle, but avoid structural questions. Why weren't these environments questioned sooner? Why did rumors circulate for decades without investigation? Why do some lawsuits barely get coverage at all? And why do certain names never appear in interviews, even when they're adjacent to the story? This is where comparisons to Harvey Weinstein surface. For years, people whispered. Everyone knew, but nobody spoke. And when the truth finally surfaced, the question wasn't just what he did. It was who protected him, who buried complaints, who enforced silence, who benefited from the system staying intact. That's why some believe Diddy's arrest isn't the end of the story. It's the containment phase. One man absorbs the consequences, the system survives another cycle, and the public is left arguing over personalities instead of power. But there's one more detail that keeps resurfacing, and it makes people uneasy. Diddy wasn't just connected to celebrities. He was deeply connected to corporations, labels, distributors, media partners. And when people began examining that layer, one company kept appearing in the background, Universal Music Group, the largest music company in the world, a gatekeeper of careers, visibility, and silence. And that's where the story goes next, upward. Because if Diddy falls, but the system that enabled him remains untouched, then the question isn't whether justice was served, it's whether justice was managed.
Only one person.
Oh, go on.
And I call him Sean. That's Jay-Z. We call each other Sean.
Okay.
Yeah. Nobody else could call me Sean.
He's
You
the
know,
only person
there's
who's
not a
Sean
single-
approved.
There's not a single person that
Outside
should be,
of family?
That should be outside of my mother.
Okay,
That
just
should be calling me. Yeah, they should be calling me Sean.
If celebrities are the faces of the industry, then executives are the hands that move everything behind the curtain. They don't trend. They don't give viral interviews. They don't show up in mugshots. And yet, nothing happens without them. As the conversation around Diddy grew louder, some people stopped asking what happened and started asking who benefits from silence. Because power doesn't disappear when one figure falls, it relocates. And when people trace the paths of money, contracts, and protection, they kept running into the same reality. The entertainment industry isn't chaotic, it's hierarchical. At the center of that hierarchy sits corporate control, and one company towers over nearly all of it. Universal Music Group, the largest music conglomerate on Earth. A company that controls catalogs, radio access, streaming placement, award show politics, and artist visibility. A company powerful enough to make someone famous, or make them disappear without explanation. Which is why, when legal filings and online discussions began referencing Universal Music Group in connection with Diddy's orbit, people paid attention. Not because guilt had been established, but because of what the silence suggested. At the top of Universal Music Group is Sir Lucian Grange, knighted, globally respected, often described as one of the most powerful figures in music history. To be clear, nothing here states guilt, only that his name, according to public commentary and referenced filings, appeared close enough to raise questions, and those questions rarely made it into mainstream headlines. And that's when some commentators began asking something that cuts straight to the core of how power operates. Who decides which stories get oxygen? Because in theory, media exists to expose wrongdoing. In practice, media survives on access. Access to artists, access to executives, access to advertising dollars. And when access is threatened, coverage changes, not loudly, quietly. Stories get minimized, segments get delayed, angles get reframed. The result isn't censorship, it's omission. And omission is harder to prove. That's why figures like Candace Owens began questioning why certain lawsuits and allegations weren't receiving the same saturation coverage as others, not defending Diddy, not denying the accusations, but asking why the conversation never climbed upward, why it stopped exactly where corporate power begins. Because Universal Music Group doesn't just distribute music, it distributes influence. It decides which artists get promoted, which voices get platformed, which controversies get ignored, which narratives become too risky, and that power extends beyond music. Executives at this level interact with politicians, media executives, tech CEOs, investment firms, global institutions, which means when controversy threatens the system, response becomes coordinated. That coordination often starts with lawyers, and not just any lawyers, the kind whose job isn't to win trials, but to prevent them. Names like Alan Grubman surface repeatedly in industry discussions. He's represented some of the most powerful figures in entertainment history. He's not known for courtroom drama. He's known for quiet resolution, non-disclosure agreements, settlements, private mediation. Entire scandals have reportedly died on his desk. And when people talk about why stories vanish, they don't talk about conspiracy. They talk about contracts. Because NDAs don't just protect privacy, they control memory. They decide what can be spoken, what can be hinted, what must never be said out loud. And that's why some people believe the real infrastructure of silence isn't fear, it's paperwork. This is where Jay-Z enters the conversation, not as an accused figure, but as a symbol of proximity and protection. Jay-Z and Diddy weren't just peers, they were portrayed as equals. Diddy once said only 2 people on Earth could call him Sean, his mother and Jay-Z. That detail might seem trivial, but to observers, it suggested intimacy, trust. And trust matters when systems rely on silence. Jay-Z has never publicly addressed rumors that have followed the industry for decades, and interviewers rarely press him on them, which raises another question people keep asking. Why do certain figures get hard questions and others don't? When Jaguar Wright sat down for interviews and openly discussed what she claimed were long-standing industry dynamics involving Jay-Z, Diddy, and others, the reaction was immediate. Her credibility was attacked. Her mental health was questioned. Her platforms became harder to access. And when one of her interviews appeared to become difficult to find after airing, it fueled speculation, not because everything she said was accepted as truth, but because suppression always creates curiosity. She asked why Jay-Z could appear on national television with Gayle King and never be directly asked about long-circulating industry rumors. She described a culture where some names are protected by default, where access is conditional on silence, and where punishment isn't always legal, it's professional. Lose your deals, lose your invitations, lose your relevance. That's how the system enforces compliance, not with threats, but with isolation. This same pattern appeared again and again. Artists who spoke out suddenly labeled difficult. Careers quietly stalled, opportunities dried up, and when people asked why, the answer was always vague. They're hard to work with. They burned bridges. They're unstable. Those labels follow you forever, which is why many believe silence is learned early, especially when careers are built on gatekeepers. And that brings us to another layer most people don't like to discuss: religion. During 50 Cent's documentary, viewers noticed something that didn't feel accidental. Images of Bishop T.D. Jakes appearing during segments discussing Diddy's circles. No explanation, no context, just placement. When Bishop Jakes was later asked about his presence in those spaces, his response wasn't a clear denial. He spoke about forgiveness, about repentance, about grace. For some viewers, that answer felt evasive, not incriminating, just unsatisfying. Jaguar Wright later suggested that if religious figures were present in elite circles, it wouldn't be for debauchery, it would be for access, influence, money, protection, because power doesn't discriminate by profession, it recruits. And when Gandil and other commentators hinted that recordings could eventually surface, the tone of the conversation shifted, because speculation turns into fear when evidence might exist. And that's the moment people start wondering, who controls the material now? Who decides what gets released? Who decides what stays buried? Because if the footage exists, and if it involves powerful figures, then exposure isn't just embarrassing, it's destabilizing, which might explain why some charges are pursued aggressively and others seem to stall, why some footage circulates endlessly and some never appears, why public outrage burns hot, then fades, and why every time the conversation climbs too high, it gets pulled back down to one familiar name: Diddy. But if Diddy is only one layer of a much larger structure, then removing him doesn't dismantle the system, it preserves it. Because systems don't fear scandal, they fear exposure. And in part 3, we're going to talk about the top of the pyramid, the layer nobody votes for, rarely sees, and almost never hears named. The layer where entertainment, politics, technology, finance, and religion quietly intersect. Because once you see that layer, it becomes impossible to believe these scandals are isolated. They start to look like symptoms, and symptoms always point to something deeper. By the time most people reach this part of the conversation, they start feeling uneasy. Not because of any single allegation, not because of any one name, but because the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every scandal looks different on the surface. Different faces, different industries, different headlines, yet somehow they all collapse the same way. One person falls. A few associates fade into silence, and the structure above them remains intact. That's when people start talking about the pyramid. At the bottom are the visible figures: artists, actors, athletes, influencers, the ones whose names trend, whose faces sell stories, whose scandals create clicks. Above them sit the gatekeepers: executives, lawyers, financiers, studio heads, label CEOs, network presidents. People with power, but still subject to forces above them. And at the very top is something far harder to define. Not a single group, not a secret room, not a conspiracy with uniforms and rituals, but a convergence: entertainment, politics, technology, finance, media, religion, a shared space where influence overlaps. This is the layer that almost never gets interrogated because it doesn't need to defend itself. It doesn't run for office. It doesn't give press conferences. It doesn't argue online. It simply decides. This is where comparisons to Epstein keep resurfacing. Not because of identical crimes, but because of identical outcomes. Epstein's world intersected with presidents and former presidents, billionaire tech founders, hedge fund managers, royal families, intelligence-linked academics. And when it all collapsed, the public expected a reckoning. What they got instead was a vacuum. No full client list, no cascading indictments, no systemic reform, just silence, and the suggestion that the most powerful names were never going to be touched. That same fear now echoes through conversations about Diddy, because if Diddy truly operated alone, then his fall would satisfy the story. But if he operated within a system, then his fall becomes a liability, a loose end. That's why some observers believe figures like Epstein and Diddy weren't masterminds. They were operators, facilitators, people who created controlled environments where powerful individuals could let their guard down and unknowingly hand over leverage. This theory is often called the honeypot model, not necessarily run by one intelligence agency, not necessarily coordinated by one government, but effective precisely because it doesn't need central control. You offer luxury, privacy, status, plausible deniability, and in exchange, you gain information, influence, insurance. Former intelligence professionals have openly discussed how honeypots work in theory, how environments are designed to extract compromising material without force. And when Joe Rogan discussed Epstein with guests who had firsthand exposure to intelligence operations, the similarities were chilling. Hidden cameras, monitored rooms, private moments documented. Maria Farmer, one of Epstein's accusers, described seeing live camera feeds monitoring bathrooms and bedrooms. That allegation has never been fully resolved, but it remains part of the public record. So when reports surfaced that large volumes of digital material were seized from Diddy's properties, the speculation exploded. Because recordings change everything. They turn rumors into leverage, and leverage doesn't need to be used loudly to be effective. It only needs to exist. This is why some people believe the footage, if it exists, may never be fully released. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. Think about it. If powerful political donors, tech executives, financiers, or religious leaders were implicated in ways that could destabilize institutions, who benefits from that exposure? Not governments, not markets, not corporations. Stability in systems like this often matters more than truth. This is where names like Bill Gates, Reid Hoffman, and other ultra-wealthy figures sometimes appear in online discussions, not as accusations, but as examples of how Epstein's orbit brushed up against the highest levels of power. Gates admitted to meeting Epstein after his conviction. Hoffman publicly acknowledged Epstein connections. No crimes were proven in those interactions. But the proximity alone raised questions that never fully get answered. And when Elon Musk hinted on Rogan's podcast that some political figures receive intense financial backing because donors fear what could happen if power shifts, people listened. Because fear implies vulnerability, and vulnerability implies leverage. That's why some believe modern power isn't enforced through threats. It's enforced through mutual exposure. Everyone knows something about everyone, which means nobody moves too far outside the lines. This is also why religious institutions enter the conversation, not because faith itself is corrupt, but because religion offers something invaluable to power: legitimacy, moral cover, influence over communities, access to loyalty. When figures like Bishop T.D. Jakes appear adjacent to elite entertainment circles, critics don't immediately assume wrongdoing. They ask a different question: why would spiritual authority and entertainment power intersect at all? And when answers feel vague, speculation grows. Jaguar Wright described these spaces not as random social gatherings, but as leverage zones, places where alliances form, debts accumulate, and silence is enforced. Gandil suggested that if recordings exist, they wouldn't be released impulsively. They would be used strategically. That idea unsettles people because it reframes everything. Suddenly, scandals aren't failures of the system. They're pressure valves. One figure is sacrificed to protect the rest. Which brings us back to media. Because media is the final filter. Stories don't disappear because they're false. They disappear because they're inconvenient. When outlets like CNN or Fox News cover surface-level scandal but avoid systemic questions, people don't assume coordination. They assume incentives, advertisers, access, relationships. Media companies rely on the same corporations that dominate entertainment and tech. So coverage stays safe. Individual wrongdoing is condemned. Structural power is ignored. That's why Dave Chappelle's words still echo years later. When he described leaving his show as escaping a plantation, he wasn't talking about money. He was talking about ownership. Different networks, same structure, different owners, same chains. If someone as successful as Dave Chappelle felt trapped by the system, what does that say about everyone else trying to survive inside it? That's the question people are finally starting to ask. Not, is Diddy guilty? Not, who else attended the parties? But why does this system keep producing the same outcomes? Why do whistleblowers get discredited? Why do accusers get buried in legal processes? Why do powerful names stay untouched? And why does the public keep accepting closure without answers? Maybe these events really are unrelated. Maybe this is all coincidence. Or maybe people are finally seeing cracks in something that's been hidden in plain sight for decades. A structure that doesn't rely on secrecy, only on silence. A pyramid nobody votes for, nobody elects, nobody sees, but everyone lives under. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The conversation isn't over, it's just beginning.